Praise be Jesus Christ. My dear brothers and sisters, as I ponder on our readings this weekend, try to find a way where I can preach the good news. You know, the first reading and the gospel both talks about the disciples of Moses and the disciples of our Lord, jealous and envious of others, preaching. And then the second reading talks about how the wealthy, those who have gold and silver, uh, their flesh will be devoured by a fire and all of that stuff. And I said, how can I preach this week without being so dirty? And then I realized, you know, Old Testament worship has always been dirty. You have the bloods of goats and animals being splashed all over the altar and the sanctuary, and those who are worshiping God would probably have to wash their hands and feet as they enter the temple. We're so spoiled nowadays, right? We come in, it's air conditioned, or if it's winter, it's heated, and then we come out and Father greets us, and we have a complaint for Father, right? It's either the speaker is not working well, or I didn't like the song, or it's too humid inside. We become spoiled. And yet worship can still be dirty, right? Here we are. We call it the unbloody sacrifice of the Mass, and yet right before our eyes, in a few more minutes, the Son of God will offer himself again. And before we know it, it could be white linens and still an air-conditioned room. But we're still going to be transported into Calvary. Now, our Lord talks about those who are with us are not against us. But then in the gospel today, he speaks about those people who's against us. Who really is our real enemy? And our Lord tells us who is our enemy. And yes, there is an enemy. Do not be fooled. And the enemy is sin. And the enemy is sin. And the good news is that our Lord Jesus Christ came and will come again for us to liberate us from sin. The Catechism of the Catholic Church talks about sin. In Article 1849, it says, sin is an offense against reason, truth, and right conscience. So again, it's an offense against reason. Why? Because when we were created as human beings, we have been endowed by the faculty of reasoning and willing. And if we do something contrary to right reasoning, we sin against our Creator. Truth. When we listen to the enemy of our soul, the prince of lies, and do what he tells us to do, we sin against truth. Because Satan is the prince of lies. Right conscience. Well, there's Catholic Church for you, the word conscience, right? I have to do it because my conscience tells me I have to do it. But we have to realize that we have to have an educated conscience. And an educated conscience can only be brought about by studies of the truth and right doctrine of the right religion. It is failure. Sin is a failure in genuine love for God and neighbor caused by a perverse attachment to certain goods. That's why James tells us in our second reading, come now, you rich, weep and wail over your impending miseries. Why? Because most rich people are overly attached to their goods. And now I'm saying, most of the people from who will be coming to the 8 o'clock Mass, I was telling the Lord, probably doesn't have $1 million in the bank account. Maybe 2 or 3 people in the congregation might have a few dollars in their bank account, but most of them do not. And then the Lord has transported me. It's like, if you go to third world countries, 99% of you here are probably millionaires. Just look at the stuff that we have in our closet, the stuff that we have in our pantry. If we examine the things, the comforts that we have in this country, we're so blessed. We'll be considered rich if we live somewhere else. Sin wounds the nature of man. It wounds us. Not only does it wound us personally, it also injures human solidarity. That's the reason why we need to go to confession, because whenever we sin, we do not simply sin against ourselves, however private, however dark it was when we committed sin. Whenever we sin, we offend another person, the person of God. Whenever we commit sin, we always commit it against human solidarity. When I steal something, I've stolen it from someone else who needs it. If I deprive God of my Sunday worship, then I have offended the very person of God. It's never private. Sin is never private. It always injures another person. Now, there are ways in which we formally cooperate with sin. And a lot of times we do not realize them. It's going to be a dirty talk. It's going to be a dirty homily, right? Sin. Well, first, we cooperate to sin by counsel. I'm going to make not going to Mass the example for all of this, okay? If you tell your child don't go to Mass, then you cooperated with your child's, your son or daughter or your husband, your wife's sin by not going to Mass, by your counsel of telling them not to go to Mass. We have formal cooperation with sin by command. If you tell your loved one, I'm telling you, stop going to Mass. We cooperate to sin by consent. If you say, you're not going to Mass, good for you. You have a formal cooperation to sin. By provocation. I bet you're not going to Mass today. Instead of just encouraging them, why don't you and I go to Mass today? We cooperate with sin by praise or flattery. That was so cool that you stopped going to Mass. You finally convinced your parents that going to Mass is never going to do you any good. By concealment. Don't worry. I won't tell my mom that you're not going to Mass anymore. By partaking. I'll have you make reasons before Mom and Dad not to go to Mass. By silence. I'm not telling Mom and Dad that you're not going to Mass. It's between you and me. Lastly, by defense of the sinful action. Oh, yeah, you deserve to rest because you've been working all week. You deserve to rest and not go to Mass. There are many different ways in which we cooperate with sin. And why am I talking about sin? Because our Lord talks about sin today. Whatever causes you to sin, our Lord says, pluck it out. Better for you to enter into the kingdom with one eye than with two eyes to be thrown into hell. That's what Gehenna is, where the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. Fire, that's hell. And our Lord Jesus talks about it too. And not to believe in it is to believe in the Prince of Lies, the enemy, the true enemy of our soul. Brothers and sisters, let's make sin our enemy. Let's not befriend sin. It wouldn't do us any good, now or forever. Our Lord came here to defeat sin, and the cause of sin is eternal death. But our Lord came, and I bet that you came here because you'd rather go before the Lord than the enemy of our soul. Today, we ask for the grace to fully receive our Lord in the Holy Eucharist and all that the graces that comes with Him as He enters our body, our soul, our heart in this holy sacrifice of the Mass. Let us have nothing to do with sin, because His desire for every single one of us is sanctity. But sanctity is difficult. It's not an easy task. That's why we need each other. If sin brings division to human solidarity, grace unites. And if we live in grace together, we become conquerors of sin and death like our Lord Jesus. May the desire of God for you to be a saint and live in grace begin today, now, for all of you who desire to love Him in simplicity of heart.